All right, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. As you can tell, I am not Rainey. She is sick today, and I'll be running the meeting in her absence, so I know we all hope that she gets better soon so that you don't have to listen to me as more than you already do. I'm also not as practiced in doing this, so please bear with me while I muddle through this tonight. I don't think we have any guests with us. Oh yes, Paul is here. Sorry, I don't even view Paul as a guest. We have legal counsel with us. Rather than embarrass myself by on the spot forgetting someone's first name, can we go around and just say who's present?
Okay. Sarai.
Paul. Sid.
Shelley.
Mia. Ryan.
Jen.
Eddie.
Caroline.
Kevin.
And Kelly. All right, so there was an informal meeting of the Charter Draft Subcommittee this last Sunday where we went over and reviewed the memorandum provided by Paul on Article 4 of the draft charter, which is legislative procedure. Really quickly though, before we get to that, I want to, if we can, take a look at Article 2, which was, oh, you're right, we should approve the minutes. So who all has had a chance to look at the minutes from last meeting? All right, are we prepared to have a vote on approving the minutes from last meeting?
We do in fact move to approve things.
There we go. All in favor? Oh, sorry.
I'm doing the 3rd and then the 10th separately.
Oh, yeah, there's the
Yes, there's 2 bunches.
the seventh.
Okay. All right, so let's first do
That's last Thursday. So last Thursday's meeting was my motion. Second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstained?
That's the second. Then
It
again,
says good.
oh, sorry.
The meetings from last Thursday's minutes are hereby approved. And I believe we took minutes from the subcommittee meeting on the 10th? On the 10th.
Move to approve those as well.
Second.
All approved, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
One abstention.
And then one abstention. Okay, we're ready to go. Good. The minutes from the meeting on the 10th are hereby approved.
Can you, the one from the seventh, can you just fix that March 3rd on the top real quick?
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, I'll do it as soon as I finish. Sorry.
While he's doing that, I think 2 nights ago, either 2 nights ago or last night, I don't remember which, I posted on the OneDrive and also sent an email out to everyone the latest draft of the charter. I've cleaned up the formatting a little bit so that it's more legible for our purposes. Everything that has been prior, has already been approved is still in green. The sections that are in black type are new and have neither been reviewed by the group nor voted on. And if it's in red, it was something that we had a question or a problem with and needed to keep working on. Shelley actually drafted up language for Article 2. I believe it was mostly boilerplate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if people want to take a minute to kind of look through it, like I said, this is fairly boilerplate. I don't know that there's really anything in it that we need to debate too much, but does anyone have it? I'll open it to the floor. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about Article 2 in general?
Do you want to just read through it like we did previously, or are we just
All right, I'm going to just read through really fast and we'll go section by section. Section 201 is powers. The village shall have all powers possible for a village to have under the Constitution and the laws of the state of Ohio, as fully and completely as though they were specifically enumerated in this charter. Title to all real property shall be taken in the name of the village. Anybody have a problem with that? Section 202, manner of exercise. All powers shall be exercised in the manner prescribed in this charter, or if not so prescribed, in the manner provided by legislation of the village. When not prescribed in this charter or by legislation of the village, then the power shall be exercised in the manner provided by the laws of the state of Ohio, until council provides a different manner of exercising the powers. Alrighty, construction. The powers of the village under this charter shall be construed liberally in favor of the village, and the specific mention of particular powers in the charter shall not be construed as limiting in any way the general powers granted in this article. Any questions? Intergovernmental cooperation. The village may exercise any of its powers, perform any of its functions, provide any related financing jointly or in cooperation, by contract or otherwise, with any one or more states, including but not limited to the state of Ohio and any of their political subdivisions, special districts, instrumentalities, divisions, or agencies, the United States or any of its divisions or agencies, or any individual, partnership, corporation, or other type of entity, whether for-profit, not-for-profit, unless prohibited by the Constitution of the state of Ohio. This just basically says we can work with anybody we want. Cool? I hereby move that we approve the language in Article 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstaining? Article 2 is approved. Alrighty. Do we want to try to spot check the stuff from Article 3, or do we want to jump right into Article 4? I feel like I did email Paul and he replied back to me, so I do have answers on some of this stuff. I'm just wondering if maybe for purposes of efficiency, if we should try to jump right into Article 4, but I guess I don't have a preference. We can do it in whatever order we want. You know what, let's go on to Article 4, and then at the end of the meeting, we can jump back and try to talk about some of this stuff that's in red. So Article 4 is legislative procedure. What we did in the subcommittee on Sunday was try to get a general sense of what was boilerplate, what was going to need special attention, work through the memo, kind of get a sense for what we thought maybe the group would probably lean towards in the regular meeting. And then I put together kind of a best guess in terms of language, but obviously nothing was voted on Sunday, nothing was decided in one way or the other. And we do have a decent chunk of work to do with this. So I guess I'm going to do my best to kind of go section by section and correlate and then refer to where that's referenced in the memorandum. So section 401, and I also followed the general order in which the sections are handled in a lot of the other charters. So we're trying to match that. Section 401 is the form of an action. So there's kind of two ways to go based on the memo. If you look at literally number 1 in the memo, it talks about how we can either be more specific or more general. I kind of went more specific on this and went that route. It seems like that's the way we've been going in general. So section 401A is talking about how non-legislative action shall be by motion. Legislative action shall be by resolution or ordinance. And then there's kind of that caveat built in of just because a specific thing that council does may not perfectly fall in line with that doesn't make it automatically valid. Anyone have any problems with that? Then it's next, section B, council shall use a motion to determine policy and procedural matters. Motions will be used to conduct elections and appointments within council, and then as otherwise provided in the charter or in, for instance, council rules. Section C is explaining what resolutions are for, which is legislation that is temporary, informal, or ceremonial, and then obviously the catch-all of, if some other part of the charter says this shall be done with a resolution, then it allows for that. And then the big one is ordinances. That is general or permanent legislation, and then obviously as otherwise provided. So that's just kind of laying out that groundwork. Does anyone have a problem with anything in 401? All right. Do we want to approve section by section?
We have one question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Didn't we talk about putting something in about like hiring employees and being able to do it, not by, maybe this is not.
We did talk about it. I ended up not putting that in because I thought, I kind of got the sense that maybe that was something we would need to discuss, but that would be down in, I think, another section.
Yeah, I seem to remember that coming down being a different section.
I remember it fall under mayor or administrative.
Well, there was that question, and then also basically wasn't the concern is that we don't want to have to force 6 weeks of legislation just to be able to commission a police officer, and that would be that would fall under, I think, the emergency section.
I think.
Oh, yeah, there was a slice out for.
Right, and so we'll discuss that a little further. So I guess what I'd like to do, let's just go step by step. I move that we approve section 401 as written. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Section 401 is approved. Let's go. All right, section 402 is the form of ordinances and resolutions. This is mostly boilerplate, if I recall, or not boilerplate, but copy and paste as I recall. The only thing that's really different is 402AI. So I copy and pasted from one of the other charters. Form of ordinances and resolutions shall be established by council rules. Something that we kind of talked about on Sunday. I'll be honest, this was more of a me thing. So if the rest of the group is like, yeah, we don't really care, Kelly, or if we think that this could be problematic, now's the time to decide that, and I can easily delete this sentence. But I would throw in something along the lines of all ordinances and resolutions shall be consistent in form during the legislative term. I just wanted to make sure that stuff was going to read the same over time, and we weren't going to come up with a bunch of different special rules in council that makes all the ordinances look different and therefore not be able to be understood by a regular person.
In my experience,
It's just not a problem.
well, I mean, I know the village isn't huge, but sometimes you got legislation, maybe you have one legal counsel that's maybe drafting something for you, or you're pulling resolution from some other source. Maybe something provided by the state or something like that. And those can just jump all over the place. In fact, they often do.
Okay.
And in my experience in trying to conform legislation to a specific, say if I'm drafting an ordinance for city gas.
Okay.
I'll go to the CNS website, say, okay, what do their ordinances look like? And invariably, they just kind of bounce. I don't think it's because of any bad motives, it's just people weren't paying attention to that, And my recommendation, I see that, I kind of get concerned, like, what exactly does that mean? How would you enforce it? You know what I mean?
And I guess it could also be more expensive because if we're paying council to redraft the same language just to fix the formatting thing.
Yeah.
It also allows for, in these rules, to have kind of standard ordinance, standard resolution, and then the rules say that at times that ordinance is required.
Just in my experience, people aren't paying attention.
And it might be argued because we down like for them.
I like the spirit of it. I think that words like all, shall get dicey, but I have no problem with something along the lines of wherever practical, unified or standard form should be adhered to. Right? It gives the instruction of the spirit of the idea, which is that there should be a consistency without, what I would hate to happen is one council person have a great idea, draft a resolution all on their lonesome, not understand, convince enough people, right, they pass it, and then somebody goes back and says, it is not in the same form as everything else we did in this legislative session, so that is void.
Right, I mean, I like, Brian, I agree with you, I like the spirit of it, but if someone doesn't like legislation, this kind of thing gives them openness.
It gives a,
Well, you violated the charter.
Council meetings and say you violated the charter.
So what about something like where practicable ordinances and resolutions should follow a uniform format?
Yeah, because I noticed that there's a lot of discussion about having places where ordinances would be, available for residents so they can read it. If it has uniformity, it's.
And that was what I was what was in my head, I was like, I want a lay person to be able to say, yeah, I understand this, and not get tripped up with, well, this looks completely different, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Like, that was kind of my concern.
Honestly, I think that concerning legislation, you run that risk no matter how.
Yeah. All right, I believe the rest of this is copy paste. Legislation shall only contain one subject, shall be clearly expressed in its title, with the following exceptions: appropriation ordinances may contain various accounts for which monies are appropriated, and ordinances which are codified or recodified are not subject to the limitation of containing one subject. That letter B is all copy paste. Anybody have any concerns? So, unless anyone has any other questions, I'm gonna move that we approve section 402 as written.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Yes.
There's not.
Oh, yeah, sorry, as it is on the screen there, where I
Oh,
changed.
no. I should have looked.
I'm sorry. Also, if I forget to actually say all in favor, it's because I'm expecting Rainey to say it. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Section 402 is approved. 403, is,
I have a question, should get ready to do this.
yes.
I heard a lot of discussion about public hearings and then also public meetings. And is there a difference between a public hearing and a public meeting?
Yeah,
I believe if you are, so a public meeting, I feel has no designated form, right? We're a public meeting, but a public hearing is for both an express purpose, and I believe, in my opinion, has an express form, where that is a presentation of and an opportunity for residents to weigh in. It's like, they just had on Monday, the public hearing regarding the zoning variance, right?
Which was advertised and had a 30-day waiting period, et cetera.
All of that is.
So when you use the public hearing, do you mean that same type
Yes,
of
yeah,
thing?
that was my intent.
something that we can consider doing is somewhere in the charter, whether it's in this article or somewhere else, maybe down at the bottom, like one of the kind of, general articles, is we could define what is a public hearing and what must it include. I mean, something to think about.
I've always seen the public hearing part as something a lot more defined and restrictive for variances and for zoning kinds
Well,
of
I
things.
think if I remember where we had tried to, because it was brought up here as an effort to force communication,
Yeah,
right? That's why, that was the intention in this discussion, to force communication, because that is, I believe, the single biggest issue we have with our government is a lack of communication. So in our discussion, we were trying to find points where we could force that communication. So, we were laying out types of legislation that would require a particular kind of communication. And I don't remember if we landed on it, but, if an emergency were overpassed, it would another point to force communication. That's what we were working on.
And I worked some of that stuff in a little bit, I'll point it out when I get to it. Some of this is copy pasted, a lot of it is copy pasted. I didn't want to do too much custom stuff based on Sunday's discussion. I wanted to kind of wait for the whole group. All right, kind of just going, sorry, go
I
ahead.
said, yeah, the public hearing language in some charters, I see, makes me nervous because it's not clearly defined what it is. They just throw out this word, public hearing. What does that mean? How do you know if you've complied or not? I mean, I think generally speaking, if council is considering a legislation at a public meeting, that seems to me to be a public hearing. What else are you doing in addition or requiring in addition to that? I just think you have to be careful about it.
I think that makes total sense. And tonight's the night to work that in somewhere, so. All right, so section A, legislation may be introduced by any elected official or the administrator at any regular or special meeting of council. So based on our form of government, that includes the mayor as an elected official, and then obviously any of the members of council. Prior to introduction, the clerk shall distribute a copy of the legislation to each elected official and to the administrator. File a reasonable number of copies in the office of the clerk and such other public places as council may designate, and publish the title of the legislation together with a notice setting forth time and place for its public hearing before council. Something that we talked about on Sunday, I did not put it in here because this was a copy paste, but something that we had talked about was in 2019 with the internet, do we want to consider, instead of saying for just title only for some of this stuff, maybe requiring the full text of the proposed legislation? Like I could see this section, little I, instead of saying publish the title of the legislation together with a notice, what if it was publish the full text of the legislation on the village website? Or so, I don't know, it's something for the group to consider.
I agree. So the point of the line where it says, publish the title of the legislation along with notice setting forth the time and place, that is like the sign on the door here, the sign at the playground, the sign at the pool. You don't want to, in those places, I don't know that you want a full draft of the legislation, right? However, I do think that we could add an and statement there that says, and make available, make digital copies available either upon request or on the village website. I don't know what is too prescriptive there, right? Maybe the village could choose to not have a website, that would be dumb, but I would hate to require a website for the purposes of posting legislation. Only for next year, the idea of websites falls out of vogue, and now we have, Barney pages or something, and we've said you have to have a website. Nobody uses the World Wide Web.
They could revise the charter and.
Right, yeah.
Well, okay, so
I know I'm crazy, but it's.
yeah, I mean, okay,
It's not good
obviously,
for you.
obviously it'll change, the internet will change, websites will change. Something will replace websites, something far easier will replace websites.
Why don't you,
That's true.
why don't you just say publish on electronic media such as the
I
website?
can do that.
Yeah, I agree.
What about leaving it to council rules?
That's what I was thinking.
No.
Because a council could have chosen to do this. I like the idea that council's trying to do this and hasn't happened. So
Yeah.
it's time to put it in,
Council's tried to what?
ask to beg that these things be put on our website. And because council doesn't directly control our website.
Right. Yeah.
Volunteer. But anyway, that's a whole other level of local politics. I believe it should be prescribed and language, and I also believe that language should indicate on, that it's on demand, right? Not, instantly available. Because if you just say on digital media, that'd be great, come on in and pick up a thumb drive.
And it should be publicly available.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of having to request it. It should be available on demand, digital.
And I think knows the extent of this problem knows that we actually have to say this in the charter. We have to say it. Otherwise, it'll never be available anywhere.
I honestly believe that this sentence is a selling point for the charter.
Yeah, me too.
And so what I just did is I changed the end of the subsection, comma, and the full text of the proposed legislation shall be made available on the internet. Is there a better way to word that?
That's good.
I thought, I like Dick's idea. And, well,
And when the internet changes its name, they can revise the charter.
I think there's some other places here too, that this will have an impact. because
yeah,
Being on council, you would arrive sometimes at a council meeting and have a piece of legislation in front of you that you've never seen.
and that's not okay.
Oh, no, it was not fun. It was not fun, so this would help.
So A is, and so we're kind of doing this chronologically, right? So A deals with introduction, and then once it's been introduced, we're talking, this next one, letter B, this is the big one, this is the reading, like the 3 readings rule, right? So,
Can I just interject? something?
Sure.
I mean, one of the challenges that you face in trying to adopt a charter for any community, right, is when you put in restrictive provisions to try to prevent abuse, you also run the risk, and I would say almost the certainty, of that coming back to bite people down the road.
Yeah.
When there's completely legitimate needs to do things quickly. I mean, I run into that all the time, you know, in my world when I'm doing, you know, helping local governments, finance debt, refinance debt. A lot of times those things kind of come down to the wire. People aren't being deceptive.
Right.
Sometimes things, you know, kind of emergency situations come up. So, I mean, I'm not trying to open a can of worms. You can argue it both ways. I'm just saying, the more restricted you set it, the more opportunity you create.
so if we need to, if council needs to consider legislation that's extremely time sensitive such that they might need to be considering doing away with both the readings and but passing it as an emergency, do they really have time to follow everything in 403A1?
I mean, you could add something like, you know, whenever possible.
Well, it just says prior to introduction, any legislation shall be distributed.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Could someone walk around in the council meeting and say, here you go, here you go, here you go?
Well,
I
yeah,
distributed it.
everything
I think they could. I think that first clause, they could do that, but
You
then,
could do that for everything except published title legislation together with notice, in public hearing, wasn't there something about public places?
and such other public places as council may designate, which would be in the council rules.
Right, so that would be the only part of that short time that I feel may be onerous, because, you know, if it's hot off the presses at 6:45, and, except that the title,
And what if there's an emergency meeting, special meeting, 24 hours notice? I mean, are you gonna have time to pull?
So let me ask the question this way. What is the shortest amount of time that a very industrious council could comply with that whole paragraph?
15 minutes.
Seriously, I think if they had a good way to upload things to the internet.
They could solve it in 15 minutes.
You
Call the
could,
clerk, say, please post this.
you could.
If they had the ability,
Okay, so hold on.
share legislation had the ability to post.
Well, no, I mean, do the physical
So,
posting.
if you change that last and the full text to an or the full text, if you have typed up a document, you can post it to the website with 2 more clicks.
I don't like that because
Because then you are right, and
also the way this is written is just made available on the internet. I can post it as a status on my personal Facebook wall and it complies with that section.
true.
Yeah.
Village app, I guess I will,
Something.
So if you said prior, we use the word prior and leave it up to the council to decide how to do it, okay?
well, that's the question.
No.
It wouldn't work, wouldn't help.
Well,
It would require them to somehow do it prior.
Oh, yeah,
Decide
he's never done it. And neither is the mayor. So it's up to us to figure out how we're gonna do this.
I have heard tell in days of yore that legislative items were actually on the published agendas. But that certainly hasn't happened in my city.
I kind of,
Yeah, and in
I
13 years, I've never seen that.
that at whatever point you are posting the meeting, right? If it's a special meeting, you should know why you're having a special meeting and be able to put a title on
Right.
that post.
The vote's already done.
Even if the full text isn't drafted, you could put the title, and the full text at this point could be.
If there's an emergency situation and you're kind of running concurrently where you're saying, okay, we got to call an emergency meeting tomorrow,
Right,
and you're reaching out to your attorney at the same time, say, hey, we need this resolution. It's not gonna, obviously, they can't go back in time and have that ready to go. They're going to be giving it to council very quickly before the meeting,
yeah,
in
no, I
a situation
understand.
like that. Now, hopefully that doesn't come up very often. I'm
The
trying to worst
problem
case
is it
scenario.
comes up here a lot. That's the whole problem. That's why I don't wanna, that's why I feel
But is that gonna change
uncomfortable
over
getting
a
on
new,
this.
is that normal trend going to change under this new system?
but how do you give them a
I
bar
don't know.
to strive for, without making it, you know, like, yeah, you should.
Because I think we,
report this.
yeah, I get that we don't want to unnecessarily hinder, but there has to be, like you said, there has to be a minimum. There has to be some kind of bar.
So I have two thoughts. One is I think that this is a shaping point of what we're trying to get across, right? That we are, like you say, setting a bar. We are saying that it is very much not acceptable to regularly run up against that deadline, right? That shouldn't be how business happens, right? What I can say is that to mitigate that, right, this can be, you know, these notifications can be part of, you know, the exception process that we've already outlined for waiving readings, waiving, you know, passing as an emergency. There can be another process for, you know, when it is an exigent circumstance, and these things are not available, right, that's another call to a vote. You know, we need to read this for passage, and we haven't made the prescribed postings. Do we feel that's okay? We can council a vote on it. I think that is a reasonable compromise, so that we have it on the record, we know we failed this, we have to move forward. Yeah.
Well, don't something, if the site were down,
Yeah, so it's like we're down, yeah.
something like that, so I think that's a good idea to be able to vote and say we can't do this.
I mean, the true emergencies, we have something in there about on to,
Right.
we've got that already.
And it's specific.
It's the emergencies, not real emergencies.
It's the emergencies that are not real emergencies. And, you know, the thing that I said to Deb several weeks ago, you know, one of the things is, okay, there is legislation passed as an emergency that is financial in nature. That does happen. And that is the times when I understand why legislation needs to be passed as an
Maybe that can
emergency.
call it elevated or something else, but using the term emergency, I think it just doesn't.
What if you did that?
Well, emergency is not a term of art.
It's a term that's used that is positive on.
Oh, it's a term in Ohio law.
Yeah, I'd say it's a term of art.
I think it's
In usage, and
Guys,
so,
does this solve the problem? Add another section, the council may only waive the requirements in that section when the proposed legislation is being voted on as an emergency measure.
Okay, so are we
So if
gonna,
it's really that drastic, it really has to happen in the next 14 hours, you're gonna be voting it as an emergency measure anyway.
so are we gonna require, like we did for, what was it that we were discussing and we talked about emergency, the posting of the notices? Are we gonna require then at the next regular council meeting that they explain themselves?
I believe we come to that when we get to emergency.
Yes, emergency meetings in general, we're gonna,
Yeah, there is like.
we're gonna not vote, here's what I
Let me tell you something that's interesting about this.
Uh-huh.
is that times there would be something that would land on your desk, right, unbeknownst to you,
Right.
but it's gonna have its 3 readings, there's no big deal, it just needs to get started now. And so it isn't an emergency, it's just because we would like to have it, passed in 6 weeks, whatever it is, we just wanna get started now. And so, and they were trying to do the right thing by having 3 readings, but it just didn't happen to get.
But, so again, so if we're at a point where it's just a title and, they got it, but that title can be posted.
It could, because you probably would know where it's gonna be.
Again, I.
Exactly, it's not the full legislation, it's the title.
And even when we're saying that the full legislation is on the website, the full legislation can, at that first reading, could be very vague, or maybe even be, 2 sentences that say the gist, and then words that say draft across it. And that would satisfy
Yes, it would.
the requirement.
I guess I gotta say that in general, I'm really in agreement with like Jen and Brian. I think a good chunk of the reason that we're all in this room is because of people being really dissatisfied with how much notice, how much transparency they've been seeing.
Does anybody disagree?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay. So,
I think we just agree with each other.
And I love that, and you guys got it.
so putting a pin in A, let's look at the rest of it because this section kind of all puzzle pieces together. So,
And then I wonder, can we add in there this full text can also encompass a draft?
I think I think that's implied.
I mean, it says proposed text.
yeah, of the proposed legislation. It's,
Oh, proposed
Yeah.
legislation, okay, all right, good enough.
all right, so section B then deals with reading. We're doing 3, I drafted this so that it would need to have 3 readings, which is pretty standard. Most charters require that. So what we went with on some of this stuff was majority in terms of numbers, like what it takes to get things done. If we did something as a majority vote, I drafted it such that it's a majority of the members of council, not a majority of the members of council present.
Right.
Everyone's cool with that? And then, so for instance, letter B here, the only way to waive the 3 readings rule is if 6 members of council waive it. It's not just a majority, and instead of saying something like supermajority or messing around with quorums or anything like that, it was just, we need 6 physical human beings to waive the 3 readings.
I like what you're doing with, I recommend being real specific about how many votes you need.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna use the word majority anywhere, then somewhere you would say what majority means. Either here it's a majority of the quorum or a majority of the whole member of council. A lot of charters just use the word majority and they don't say what they mean by it. And you leave the door open. I will say, so for the way the 3 reading rule, the statutory rule is 3/4, which would be 500 votes, so that'd be 6. But for emergency, I think you got 6 for both, right? 6 for the 3 readings and 6 for emergency, which are 2 different things. But the statutory rule would be 2/3 for emergency.
What would the council votes? 2 are out.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up. 6 that's a high bar.
Yeah, it is.
That's a real high bar because if you have even one person missing, then you have to have unanimous vote to
It
get
all
that
goes
done.
back to pushing stuff through this emergency, this emergency.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's that tension between, if you've got situations that can be abused, right? But you also have legitimate needs to get things done. And so,
We've been using 4 a lot, where we
Typically, when it's a legitimate need, we have seen that kind of dissent. Right?
That's
So,
exactly
yeah, but
right.
I mean, 6, that's not, if say you're in the meeting in the summer,
You guys
you have people on vacation,
yeah,
I mean, You may have a hard time pulling 6 people at certain times.
So in my mind, that's what you call a special meeting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but some stuff, if you don't have the 6, you don't have the 6.
Right,
You're
right.
you're aware of people's schedules, and if you know
And that's just me.
on that regular council meeting that you're not gonna have 6, then you call it because Paul's on vacation.
If it's actually that important, then it's actually
Schedule
the colloquial meaning of the word emergency.
Now, you know that waiving the readings and emergency are two different
Yes.
things. Because sometimes you can have a first reading and a second reading, and even if you're in a 30-day waiting period, you want to get it passed, so you simply waive the third reading.
Right.
So there's been plenty of time for everybody to know, and you still want 6 votes, you're just waiting that third.
Well, maybe you go to that second reading and someone was planning to have a problem with it at the third reading, and they got sick that night.
So currently, it is 5 out of 6 is required to waive rules. Right, so if we're, yes,
Okay.
it is. So we are increasing the.
It's not different for, waiving as an emergency.
In current statutory village, it is 5 of 6 to waive rules, and then just a regular majority that passes an emergency. So it's 4 out of 6 to pass. That's, yeah. But, and so that was, the thinking was to raise the bar on vote, because these are things that are common verbs in our town.
So, other than you, so I copy and pasted a lot of section B. With the exception of in B, it was, at least I did the number 6. B4 though is my language. This was something that was discussed informally on Sunday. We kind of wanted to see how the whole group felt about it. This is Brian's baby. I will let him explain.
Yeah, so I'll read it. Council may not dispense with readings of legislation that substantively pertains to infrastructure, zoning, and expenditures of more than a dollar amount that we come up with. And I believe this is necessary because this is another point that where we've had problems, right? This would have forced communication for the striping and stop sign being moved on Ponderosa. That council, the streets commission met, or streets committee met for 6 months, discussed it ad nauseum within committee, looked at several different plans, made a choice, right, passed legislation, and then when the work finally went to get started 6 months later, the neighbor saw the resident saw the workmen out there and called to the mayor and said, "What are they doing? They can't do that."
Yeah.
And the project stopped, right? This is a point at which we are saying it has to hit every measure so that we can say you had every opportunity.
They were talking about it for 6 months. They couldn't have at any point started doing readings.
So I don't know, I mean, who has thoughts about all that? Sorry about
It
that.
should be an S after, the reading. Is it readings? Or is it reading, just reading of legislation?
I wouldn't say it's
I like the spirit of this, I don't know about the knowledge.
Well, let's find the next one.
I mean, I think we can argue that.
Okay.
Maybe not, maybe we'll
Expenditure. So I'm okay with actually removing the dollar amount as long as we keep infrastructure, zoning, and facilities, was the other one I wanted.
See, and that's what I'm gonna argue with you, because if we're gonna do this at all, then it seems to me there's legislation out there that doesn't have to do with zoning, doesn't have to do with infrastructure, but if council wanted to, they could go below 40 grand
Well, I think too, the word,
and dispense with the readings.
But there are other things in place for permanent stuff, right? I mean, appropriations has its own sort of,
I'm worried about the word substantial, because they could say, well, not, we give a substantial.
So
What is infrastructure mean?
streets, sewer, water.
You have to define that somewhere?
I don't think we're gonna have to define clarifying everything in a sense.
Yeah, because I mean, what if council, I don't know, wants to do something, fix a sidewalk?
No.
Right, do the sidewalk right here, and they have to wait 2.5 months.
That's not substantial. Doesn't affect anybody except the people over there.
So what I meant,
The
so
legislation.
as the person who made it up in his head, what I meant by, what I was intending to accomplish with the word substantially is I was pairing that with the requirement that an item of proposed legislation can only have one subject. So because it can't be about 4 things, it has to be about one thing. That one thing has to be substantially related to this list.
So then,
We can also, look, we have a lot to go over, we can kick the can down the road a little bit on this and think about it too.
well, I don't necessarily know that we need to, but where your substantially applies, I feel like you need to define it. And maybe as it applies to.
And we can also just take out the word substantially, we can delete the sentence, I kind of want to hear some thoughts from some of the other members of the group.
Now, you realize 3 readings could be on 3 different days.
Yeah.
Things can be done.
Yeah, you can have special meetings, you can do whatever you need to do to move things along. I guess here's my question, this was Brian's idea, we discussed it very informally on Sunday, and we discussed it a decent amount, but my recollection is there weren't terribly strong feelings from people other than like Brian and maybe 1 or 2 others. Do people in the charter group feel that this subsection is necessary to add to the charter? How does the group feel about this at all?
I think there's really good times to be fresh, think about things freshly, and other times when it makes sense to rely on extensive experience about real patterns. And in this case, it seems to me that there's a lot of examples of real patterns that have motivated you to promote this and to unpack this. And I'd like to defer to the experience, and it's not general. A lot of suggestions or examples have been given. This is nothing to sneeze at. This is something.
But I give an example, what was the reason, why did they wait 6 months to do any readings at all?
No, it wasn't the readings, so it was the work,
Research.
right? So the committee met, the committee did readings, had their way around you, and then 6 months later, the work finally was to happen, right? So we passed legislation, mayor engaged the contract, but it was fall, and you can't strike roads effectively in the fall. So they said, oh, we'll do it in April. So 6 months later, the workman shows up, and then the neighbor sees that it's going on and says, what's this? I've never heard anything about.
How does this fix that scenario?
This what I had suggested was actually a public hearing for all infrastructure, zoning and facilities related. This was I think a compromise, right?
So was this a person in the village
I see.
Yeah.
that didn't have access to finding out about this?
No.
Or did
They just said they didn't know. Eric, did you have something to add?
Yeah, but I mean, could they have found out?
Yes.
Yes.
So it was their fault.
Yeah, that would be my opinion.
Yes.
But we don't have, some ways to even think about something that's on Facebook,
Exactly.
and the whole thing doesn't have a
This is an attempt to not let a stink keep good work from happening.
Eric,
That's why I don't understand that.
Eric gets to talk.
So, thank you, sir. Folks, sorry for my cadence this evening. So on this subject, so any zoning, of course, has its own set of regulations and public hearings automatically associated with any change of rules. So that one, I think, is handled on just by itself, how zoning works. But obviously, public infrastructure and facilities can be quite large in nature. My only concern with, if I understood this correctly, we go through 3 readings regardless, is where we have true emergency situations. I didn't hear the beginning of that conversation, so perhaps that was addressed and how that worked.
Yeah, no, so this is not part of the emergency. And I actually prefer, instead of requiring 3 readings, I would prefer requiring public hearing, which can be handled in the next section with public hearing, that legislation shall follow its publication by no less than X days. And then I think the carve out should be a public hearing can be waived, in all instances except infrastructure, infrastructure, facilities, and expenditures greater than, but it should actually be before, not after.
That kind of goes back to what I was saying, earlier. What's meant by public?
Oh, yeah, you have to find it, but I'll say again, for my purposes, a public hearing is a meeting in which the expressed intention of the legislation is described in detail and provides the residents or the attendees the opportunity to provide feedback.
Are you thinking big bucks on these, like infrastructure?
No,
Structure
I
is big
think,
bucks.
I think it is infrastructure, I think you
And
even fixing the sidewalk.
Well, maybe a better way to rephrase my question would be, how does a public hearing differ than a public meeting of council?
Because it is for a single purpose, for this legislation.
we are holding.
So-
a-
so you're saying it's
restoring the only sidewalks
Yes,
or
it
the
requires a
restricting.
posting that says, on this day, we will be discussing, this legislation that is for the striping on Jordan. On this day, we will be discussing legislation for the purchase of 299 Dublin Granville Road. On this day, we will be discussing, the hiring of the architect for a potential future facility.
That would require a separate
Separate.
public meeting every single time you want to.
Absolutely. Even if that is only scheduled for 30 minutes, even if it's only whatever, that is the communication that this village is begging for.
Yeah, it is.
So like if you look at C and D on public hearings, that's all copy paste. There didn't seem to be a whole ton of variation really in the other charters that I looked at, and it's pretty toothless. Like,
Yeah, so
I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with the strength of Brian's opinion, but Brian is absolutely accurately observing that this is a toothless provision, right? Council could adopt rules that strips the public hearing of any usefulness, so why have
That's
it
what
all?
worries me is sentence D, or section D.
Yeah,
Council rules.
and
Because what if
then,
they have a public hearing, and then it's like, well, we'll have it, but we're not gonna have, based on the council rules, no public feedback.
Right, because they can suspend public rules, or council rules, any particular council rule at any meeting. Just, they have enough votes, they can suspend the rules.
right, so you look at like D, so 1, 2, and 3 are the different kinds of legislation, right? So it says when you will have your public hearing on a resolution, when you'll have it on an ordinance, when you'll have it on an emergency ordinance. But it's all unless dispensed with by council or unless otherwise specified by council. Is this something that we need to do different in Minerva Park from the other charters because of everything that's been going on the last few years?
Agreed.
So I need instructions from this group on how to redraft these sections.
So first of all, council rules do not apply to this. We have to determine how we're gonna do this, and council can't change it. They can't change it by their council rules, because it's literally, this whole process of communication has literally been used routinely. So
Is
That's
it legit
the
to
first
say this
thing.
is exempt from council rules? Is that
Well, if
something they put in
if we
charters?
demand, if we specify it in the charter, then council rules cannot circumvent.
So it trumps it always every time?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about that, council? How common is that?
Eric doesn't come.
I'd say that'd be
Usual.
unusual.
Sometimes it's
So I
so
gotta ask this question, and this is betraying some of my own ignorance. What's the point of a public hearing at all if it's happening after the legislation has been
It
passed?
needs to be before.
It needs to be.
But that's my question to Paul, like, I copy pasted this, right?
Right.
So in these other places, what's the point of a public hearing?
I don't believe that we're reading this correctly. I think in this usage of the term public hearing, this is the,
Shall follow its publication.
yeah, so this is.
That's the official publication, that's the advertisement prior to getting.
Yeah, that doesn't mean after it's been.
That's what that means.
Okay, see, that's clearly not clear because I read it the other way.
I'm missing it. What's this?
We're reading section C here, but I think, yeah.
Then I don't think the way I've drafted this is internally consistent, because I don't think C is then consistent with A.
I agree.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
And I just don't have, I can't get a grasp of what it would include, like, if we wanted to plant some trees, is that?
That does not feel like infrastructure.
So if I may, so I just have a couple of concerns. I just want to put them out there because I think it's perfectly fine. I've been here in Minerva Park for several years, and I understand the communication issues that you want to handle this in some special way. It would make it unique to Minerva Park's charter. I will point out that there's some things to consider with this, and one of them, that's of immediate concern because I'm going to be talking to council about it, is now we have, for example, a new subdivision and it's got sidewalks. Okay, now every municipality deals with its sidewalks slightly differently. There are all kinds of different flavors of sidewalk programs, who pays for what, how do the residents pay for that, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So this is something that council has to decide on because as sidewalks age, blocks have to be replaced, yada, yada. Typically what happens is there's some sidewalk program to where the engineer, the planner, someone's designated to go out, they assess on a set of criteria, a block or a group of blocks that go bad, and councils either as an entire program in order to bid it cheaply for the residents, go forth, replace individual blocks in each year or every several years, and then the amount of the money that the contractor bills is then billed back to the household through the property taxes. It's basically how it's just leaned back that way. My concern in this particular case, when we talk about every single sidewalk repair, I would assume that the program as a whole would go through the process, not the individual.
Well, that's as long as their legislation, as long as you're not passing new legislation for every repair, right? I would imagine that the legislation would read, this is how we're gonna handle repairs if that was how they chose to do it. And-
Understood.
But if they chose to, if they didn't choose to do a program like that, and they decided to appropriate funds for each and every one.
Yeah, that's a perfect example here. I want a public hearing. I want-
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you would need to do it, and that happens, quite frankly, it happens on a larger scale so that the idea is to get the best. It has to be done, and it's done on behalf of the residents, and it's done to the cheapest possible price, and the municipality bids it that way. Otherwise, individual residents are cited one by one to get their thing done, and it's quality as well as costs are all over the place in that regard. So it's a whole.
And I love your example, because just like Paul said, right, this charter won't be in place by the time they're having that discussion. But the way that discussion will more than likely happen is that they'll have a discussion in some sort of committee. I don't know which one of the current committees that might fall under, probably streets. So they'll talk about it at the streets committee. The streets committee might bring a recommendation in their council work session, right? They'll make it a decision-ish, right? They'll have 3 readings and they'll pass it. Now, if you're not me, who is one of the 20 people who watches every meeting, right, and reads their minutes, and you wouldn't know. So a decision would go by without you ever looking. So the point I'm trying to get to enforcing something more is that there's one more point. All I'm asking for is one more, this is it, we are going to talk about this, and only this.
One key follow-up. A public hearing is one thing. Now, it all comes down to how it's advertised and publicized. That's the key issue you have to put in your.
I vote we hang flyers for everyone.
Stop.
One
Oh my God. So, this is like a great
Yes.
we are potentially gonna force the council to do what they should have been doing all along. But here's the other part of it. Here's the other edge of the sword. The village has been given plenty of notice, plenty of opportunity to learn about what is going on, and has routinely then come back afterwards, after every discussion, and said, I never knew. This is kind of the drawing the line in the sand for both council and the village. This is what your charter commission put together. Either you're gonna pay attention to these issues as citizens, and you're gonna come in and gripe when we said that you can gripe. We gave you more opportunities to gripe about this. So either you're gonna pay attention and do your griping, and we've made it so that the council can't screw you out of your griping. It's a double-edged thing, and it's great. I think it's an awesome idea.
So, all right, I want to try to number one, I wanna be able to get through all of this in the next hour. Number two, I wanna try to maybe refocus us. So section 403, I think, is really dealing with two different threads. You've got a regular scenario for when our council is going to consider and vote on legislation, right? And then separate from normal, you have extraordinary. So let's break it down into those two fundamental threads. Fundamentally, what do we want the regular procedure to be for non-emergency, non-extraordinary legislation? How much time do we want, or, how much notice, how much of everything do we want for regular legislation? That's the question. Do we want to say everything has to be introduced, in writing, X, Y, Z, everything in section A, and then it'll have 3 separate readings on 3 separate days, and then a hearing, a special hearing specifically for it, and then a vote? Because that's kind of,
On regular things?
So if by regular you mean,
so right now, the way this is written, that's what's required. That's what I'm saying needs fixed, right? And that's a problem. So I don't want to talk about the emergency stuff for the moment. I want to say, regular legislation, what do we want?
the only things I believe that we should be specifying the public hearing on are, again, if we need to define it, but I'm gonna call it infrastructure and infrastructure and facilities. Those are the things, and by infrastructure, I mean. What about zoning?
Are you taking zoning out of the
I'll take
equation?
zoning out, because zoning already has special requirements, but zoning is not too.
A charter change, our zoning.
There are certain requirements they have to.
Sorry, you'll get to zoning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we'll have
okay,
it all
we'll
or-
get there.
Yeah, which is why I can say we can handle that, but, and by infrastructure, we can just spell it out. I think it's anything to do with sanitary sewer, storm sewer, water lines.
Brian, I wish Paul would have been there to say this on Sunday, because I gotta say, he changed my mind. I don't see taking that, striping the street, the stop sign story. I don't know what a public hearing would have done different for that neighbor. They would have been ignorant of it no matter what.
Well, okay, here's one thing.
I don't know how your solution solves that.
Someone else then took that and turned it into his own agenda, twisted it into his own agenda, and turned it into a giant morass.
So maybe that's not a great example of a problem that we're trying to solve here.
But if we have recreation in general laid out in this plan, there wouldn't be a problem. Okay, that's certainly not. If we have the whole verbiage of the legislation out on the internet, it sounds good. I don't know, it's just the way it is.
So my fear is that we have not done anything more or substantive. Right, so if all we're saying is it's gotta be posted, it's already posted, right? Typically, though not always, the legislative packet is available on the website, usually before their meetings. But, what I'm really advocating for here is at least one more point of communication. Because my hope would be that when we have a professional administrator, when that neighbor calls up and says, I didn't know anything about it, the professional administrator who can look at it and say, who doesn't, we'll have the professional wherewithal to say, I'm sorry you feel that way, however, here are the dates of your opportunity to have heard about it. Did you avail yourself of any of those? Oh, no, well, then I'm sorry you feel that you're in this situation, but we are moving forward with the project.
Is that ever in my motion?
I don't know anything about it.
The public hearings that we do for zoning and that,
It would have been, if it were in any newsletter, it would have been in the village update, because it's after the termination of the village.
I found the council. on.
Yes, why in the mayor, somebody, have a meeting with the person, one person can't stop them shooting
Look,
at.
I don't wanna,
But
I
they
want,
did.
guys, we're
I
getting
like
into
the
weeds with
idea.
that particular
Being on
story.
communication.
Right.
I like it.
Right, so
I know how to define it.
how else do we push communication?
Okay.
This is communication.
So,
You backed away from the dollar amount, but the reality is concerning the building. You know, it wasn't put to the vote because it fell beneath, you know, the dollar amounts, and there was no communication. So, you know, putting a dollar amount back in there, yes, a dollar amount may exclude striping and a stop sign. Yes, it might, but I mean, That's-
$50,000, anything really big
that's
concerning the overall community.
right, that stop sign thing was just one example. There have been others that were big dollar amounts.
And obviously, there can be small things that people just get their head around.
Yeah.
so, alright,
Can the rest of you chime in here? I would really like to hear from everyone who doesn't speak.
Well, I feel like we've already sort of worked this issue over from every angle, so I don't think I have anything more to add at this point. I mean, I would suggest that either we take a vote right now and decide, or we just set this aside and come back to it later, because I think we've got 10 more things to get through tonight. And I don't want to rob anyone of a chance to speak, if anyone has any feelings on it.
I agree with Evan at this point, I also feel like we're getting ahead worse.
I think it would be
I mean, I agree with you, I think this is a vital thing, but I don't think we're gonna.
Well, my last comment is, if we can come up with strict means of communication, it will solve a lot of problems for the rest of the state.
Yes, well,
so, alright. I'm gonna propose this. We're not gonna vote on section 403. I'm gonna go not back to the drawing board, but I'm gonna work on it a little bit more and then in general, just to kind of let you know, my plan is to, I think 403A is probably fine. I think 403B, we're gonna have to massage that section 4 and just vote on it at some point. I would like permission to take C and D and try to add teeth to them. Maybe take out by council rule or find some other way to keep council from being able to eliminate public hearings as a viable means of communication.
Yeah.
Okay?
great idea.
Alright, I'm gonna do this in red and move on. Like, okay. All right, 404 is vote required for passage. I think this was copy paste. For the most part. Copy paste with, us with us having kind of cherry picked some of the things that we said we liked on Sunday. So vote of the question of passage of any ordinance, resolution, or motion shall be taken by roll call of members to be entered on the journal or other record proceedings in accordance with council rules. None shall be passed without a concurrence of a majority of the members of council. Does that make sense? In considering whether a motion or resolution or motion has received a majority vote of council, and this was something that was in the memo, and I need to know that the group all agrees on this. If someone abstains or that, they do not vote, but they're present, that is considered to be acquiescing to the majority vote. So if the rest of council votes the passage down, they are considered to have acquiesced to that. If they vote to pass the legislation, then they're considered to have acquiesced to that.
Yeah.
Is that
But
how?
they're not counted as yes vote.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, because there's still an abstention.
Yeah.
but it doesn't count as a no vote.
No,
Yes.
exactly. I did bring a handout where it just says exactly that.
Yeah.
Abstentions, just abstentions, sometimes it goes with the yes, sometimes it goes with the no, but it's always.
So that's how this is written, is that how we want it to work in Monroe Park?
Yeah.
I would like you to change acquiescence in to acquiescence to. Just 'cause
I am 100% for changing that.
A small point in A there references entered on a journal, capital J. I'm not sure that word appears anywhere else.
Again, copy paste, I'm sure it was,
Maybe minutes would be better. or
roll call entered on, what if we just say the clerk's record?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we do mention clerk's record elsewhere in the charter.
So you're on this, you're not talking about just regular motions, like I move to accept the minutes, and then you have to do a roll call.
No, this is for,
Ordinances,
Or just each ordinance resolution, okay.
should I take out motion?
Well, you could, yeah, I mean, they do a motion.
Again, guys, this was copy paste, and I'll tell you when it's copy paste, that means some other charter wrote it this way, and I'm all for
And you could
fixing
say,
it.
the vote on question of passage of each ordinance or resolution made by motion shall be taken by roll call. So,
Yeah, so motion, so if someone just says, I move to adjourn,
yeah, it doesn't.
right, that's typically a voice vote,
I
not
think we
a.
just take it out.
Yeah.
Ordinance or resolution.
So probably just taking it out will be
Yeah.
another section of how to pass motions, because they will have a motion.
Shall we take it? Roll call. Rules, none shall be passed without concurrent. All right, B, each emergency ordinance or resolution shall require the affirmative vote of at least 6. So that's what Paul was kind of cautioning against. Do we really want it to be 6?
I have reconsidered and I would be okay with 5.
So I guess what I would say
That's 5 or 7, right?
What's that?
Yeah, I think that's.
Emergency?
for emergency,
I'm for
keeping in mind that if something, it might be farther down.
What's your
I think it was the previous one that already specified states.
So farther down, I have it drafted such that if legislation is introduced as an emergency and receives a majority vote of council but does not receive 6, then it passes but not as an emergency.
Yeah.
And so it does not take effect immediately.
So a majority of 7 is 4. So if you get 4, it passes.
Then it passes, just,
Emergency.
it doesn't take effect immediately.
Right.
With that caveat, do we still want to lower it to 5?
I'm still okay with that.
If that's how I.
If you have been to council recently, you may have a council member who always wants to know how hard it is. Okay, so I would say 5 is appropriate.
I'm hearing a lot of people saying 5, I'm not gonna argue with them. I'm just gonna remember to put the Roman numeral 5.
Look at me being reasonable, just remember that.
All right, so now
Let the
the,
minutes show that you
I will add it, I will add it.
to the record written in stone, each emergency ordinance or resolution shall require the affirmative vote of at least 5 of the members of council for its enactment. If it should fail, it was right there. If the emergency ordinance or resolution should fail to receive the required 5 affirmative votes, but receives the necessary majority for passage as non-emergency legislation, it shall become effective as non-emergency legislation. Everyone cool with that?
Yeah.
Do you want to say that the ordinance resolution shall be amended and become effective as non-emergency? Because in the legislation, it'll say it's an emergency. So it needs to be amended so it's not an emergency.
I actually think that's a great idea. Does anyone have a problem with that?
No,
How's that look?
Beautiful.
All right, it now reads, it shall be amended and become effective as non-emergency legislation. The vote on legislation shall be entered in the minutes or other record of council proceedings in accordance with council rules. As soon as possible after adoption, the clerk of council shall have the legislation and a notice of its adoption published and available to the public at a reasonable fee. Do we want to add something and shall be made available online?
Yes.
Yes. Can we, this is one of my pet peeves, have the legislation and any attached exhibits?
Yeah. Yes.
I swear there's an attached
I guess
exhibit.
it's a lot in the parks, village website.
So we're gonna kick that can down the road a little bit. I wanna try to come up with some wording that doesn't stink.
Can we have an amendment or something at the end, defining terms? like
We can
that?
absolutely do that. Alright, legislation and. Wow, I can't type tonight. As soon as possible after adoption, the clerk of council shall have the legislation and accompanying exhibits and attachments and a notice of its adoption published and available to the public at a reasonable fee, and the legislation shall be made available online. Alright. So, everyone was warm and fuzzy about 404. I move that we approve the language as drafted for section 404. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? 3. Beautiful. Section 405, form and content of emergency legislation. Let's argue for another half hour.
Only a half hour?
Each emergency ordinance or resolution shall determine that the ordinance or resolution is necessary for the immediate preservation. So this was one, and it's discussed in the memo. We can do this is very specific and it's very kind of stringent, or we can choose to kind of leave it up to council, or, leave it up to council rules as to what is an emergency. When we discussed this on Sunday, I felt like most of the people in the room were pretty much in agreement that we wanted it to be more stringent. But yeah, if people like how this is written, I'm not gonna argue about it because I like this.
I like that.
Can I add something?
Yeah. Please.
I feel like I'm the contrary voice. I deal with emergency legislation on a regular basis that would not clearly fit within this. I think this language is pulled from Groveport.
I think so, yeah.
I've not seen language like it anywhere else. And usually, again, when I'm dealing with entities, I'm trying to help them finance a project that they want to finance. Or maybe save hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Now, you're borrowing huge dollar amounts, so that maybe wouldn't be as applicable to you. But I mean, I know the village does borrow from time to time. There's financial things you're doing. So, say there's an opportunity to do something that's really important to the village, non-controversial, but it's not a demonstrated threat. I mean, again, I think that the word emergency, I think, kind of triggers people, but just think of it as, maybe try to put that word to the side and just think of it as effective immediately. That's what it means.
What's an example of that? Give me something that wouldn't be able to go through the normal processes, or even like ways we read these and stuff. Give me an example where we're talking about like financial, we're talking about.
For instance, interest rates are changing all the time. And sometimes you need to move quickly to get the financing done. You don't want to wait 30 days. 30 days can be the difference between something happening or not.
Could save you $100,000.
Yeah, so if you are authorizing the village to engage in a loan of some kind, and your locked rate is only good for the next 29 days. Right, so if you do not pass as an emergency, then you can't engage in that for 30 days. So on day 31, your locked interest rate is no longer good. And if you're borrowing $1 million and your interest rate just went up 0.25%, that's substantial.
Yeah. I mean,
So that is but it's not an immediate threat to welfare.
right, yeah, that's what I was like, to give an example, I mean, I haven't been practicing for 40 years like some people, but even, in my period of practicing, there was a Great Recession hit. And when everything was going along normally, and then all of a sudden, boom, credit market seized up, and we're just sitting there twiddling our thumbs for months.
Why can't you put into something about considerable financial harm to the village? And
I like it. So you can, but how do you?
But-
How do you define it?
How do you demonstrate? Because some of the things that rate's gonna go up.
You don't demonstrate. You leave it open.
But saving money, I wouldn't call financial harm, it's just, that's a financial opportunity.
He's just trying to say it's not a demonstrated threat to the public. So.
I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to get at is, there are legitimate times where
Okay, why?
you're gonna want things to be effective immediately, and words like demonstrated threat are very restrictive.
But if we have that in A that says contain a statement of the necessity for the emergency in order to, meet the deadline of such and such a date where the interest rate, is locked in.
As long as,
It's very,
yeah, I think what Paul's point is that demonstrated threat,
it's not the right word.
it may not be right. And I will tell you that this argument was exactly my argument when I tried to pass the purchase of $29.99
Yes, it was.
as emergency.
Yes, it
Because
was.
with the information I had in front of me, it was a savings of over $1 million to buy that building.
And exactly, and I remember saying to him, I'm glad that we are forcing you to lose that because this was wrong. And here's the thing, is if everybody had wanted the building, the village would have paid a lot more money for the building because of that, and other reasons too.
So let me try it this way. So Paul, my question to you is, given, because the two of them are certainly not alone in the village of Minerva Park with disliking the overuse of emergency legislation.
It's just a bad word.
Oh, immediate, I'll change it to the word immediate. People in this village have a dislike of the extensive use of immediate legislation. What's the solution? Because if we leave it completely open-ended, I think a lot of people are gonna not look very kindly on this charter.
No, they're not, they're absolutely not, they're gonna ask us what we did.
So what are some ways that we
Yeah, I
can
mean,
think about
that's
maybe
the tension,
meeting?
right?
Yeah.
If as I said already, you got the tension between, not tying people's hands and allowing, and giving some flexibility to do some things when legitimate needs arise, or you get, because of some legitimate concerns that happen from past actions, you get real restricted and you may miss some opportunities,
So
so.
can I
Go either way.
suggest, because I really feel like we're hung up on demonstrated threat. That's the level of what we're trying to get through here. And I think if it was council shall declare emergency measure only in the event of a potential risk, right? I think potential risk is clear enough that we're saying you have to be able to say what it is and then state it clearly. And potential risk is lower than demonstrated threat, right? A person with a baseball bat in front of you is a demonstrated threat.
Potential risk is anything.
But
Potential risk is literally
It's
anything.
not to harp on the building again, but use that, you're arguing that building, if the building didn't go through, nothing negative happens to the village.
yeah,
No financial impact, but
yeah,
if there's but nothing happens, and still nothing can still happen. But if you had like you mentioned the rates, something like that could negatively affect, that could be a potential opportunity / risk to the village. Now, what is the fastest way something can get through now? Normal, what is the fastest way to get legislation through now?
You could waive the readings in the first reading, and then you pass it by emergency in the first.
Without emergency, without
emergency, without these readings, 3
So
days.
you can waive readings, and you can pass something in 3 days.
Oh,
You pass it on that.
I'm talking
30-day
about
waiting period.
so non-emergency.
3 days, wait, readings, pass it, and then 30 days.
Okay, so that's the 3 days.
Without any exception, 33 days.
Can you have anything that's in between that? Can
We
you
can
have
make
some
whatever
kind
we want.
I'm just saying
That's
that.
what we're doing.
So I realize, and it's very interesting. So my 20 years of experience have brought me forward to you, and this is a very fascinating experience overall because I haven't been through a pure charter creation like this, and I think this is very organic and it's very excellent. But Minerva Park is very unique because of you are very small and intimate. Okay, most, and I think of this more on the macro view. So most municipalities I've worked with already have been established for a number of years. They've already had their charters, good and bad, that they're using. But all of them, successful as well as the not so successful municipalities, but more on the successful side with their charters, utilize emergency language. And I believe, and I look at Paul, I believe emergency, that word is from statute, correct? They have.
It is, yeah, again, I think that word creates a barrier for a lot of people, I think. I mean, it's kind of a term of art. I would try to ignore the word emergency and just think of it as effective immediately.
So
Yeah.
So hold on, I just want to come back, I want to jump on. So I want everyone to just think of this. I realize there are concerns based on Minerva Park's unique history and the way that the council and the mayor that are acted over the years and the way people have done things and not communicated. But I would tell you that the successful municipalities utilize emergencies well, right? They use them because they have to under certain conditions and you can't necessarily anticipate what those are. And if you tie the hands of your future councils and your municipality as a whole, it will cause problems. And of course, maybe they won't be terrible problems. You can't necessarily foresee that. And they just change it, in 2 years' time. But it's not, if it was such emergency for such a problem, I would argue that they would have been banned long before we got to this point. And they're necessary. What I'm going to tell you.
I completely disagree with the last portion of what you said, that they banned long before. But I do, there is financial legislation that we have to have passed. It is passed as an emergency. That happens regularly, and it has to happen.
Why can't we do something?
What if we-
Financial.
That's what I've been
So-
saying.
What if for section 405A, we delete 405A1 entirely, and then in section A, in front of the word welfare, you put the word financial. So each emergency ordinance or resolution shall determine that the ordinance or resolution is necessary for the immediate preservation of public peace, health, safety, or financial welfare, and shall contain a statement of the necessity for the emergency. That solves a little bit of that problem of council just doing it because they feel like it, or that being the public perception anyway. Because then council is at least obligated to explain themselves as to why this is being done in an immediate fashion. And then if we get rid of subsection 1, we don't have to worry about the demonstrated threat thing.
Yeah, sometimes written already requires you to contain a statement.
Yeah, like that-
Which is a common thing.
Yes, the
Yeah, I
subsection is covered up.
Yeah, I think,
It's not always financial welfare.
yeah, finance is assumed within that. If you put financial in front of welfare, you've actually limited what.
So if we just delete this,
Yeah.
does it
Yeah.
do what we want it to do?
Well, so I think that the intention behind demonstrated threat was to make it a specific statement of what was the issue being solved? What is the demonstrated threat? The risk, if you just say, shall determine that the ordinance or resolution is necessary for immediate preservation of health, safety, and welfare, we will do exactly what we do today, which is say, we'll add the language that says, for the safety, preservation of health, with blah, 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 without any.
No, shall contain the statement of the necessity. I thought that meant like the detail.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
I think that's what you think it means, but I think we need to be clear.
Well, what if we just put the word detailed in front of
Well,
statement?
how about with specificity?
Yes,
Specific,
With
Yeah.
specificity.
specific is good.
yeah, specific is good, and then we can get rid of one, and I think that we should.
So we do this,
Yeah.
does that make everybody happy?
And then
Following issues may not be passed as emergency measures. Ordinance or resolution regulating the rates for certain, this was copy paste. Does anyone have a problem with B 1, 2, or 3?
For services of private,
I just, when I read that, I had a hard time coming up with a situation where B1 could come into it, but.
Like I said, B and C are both copy paste. I'm not real clear what B gets
So,
here, gets
so I
out.
could, so we, I don't know if we set our surcharge on the water bill, I don't know if we set that, I know we allocated. But we have a surcharge on the water bill. So if we set that rate, that's where number one would come.
Would it also affect, like,
But what, you need the water from Columbus, right?
Yeah,
So, but the Columbus is, that's not privately owned or investor owned.
what about the trash pickup?
We do negotiate that rate.
Yeah, we
And you said you couldn't pass it in the agency.
Right, couldn't pass the adoption of the contract.
Isn't that what we just argued about for half an hour though? What if the trash contract is up, the administrator forgot, and now we need to renegotiate it in the next 2 weeks?
That's an emergency, because the trash is in the pile.
That's,
Right.
and that was.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right, I want to move on then to C.
But,
Sorry.
no, but this, so, I mean, it sounded like you guys were stating that you would be in favor of emergency in that kind of situation.
Yes, we would.
Yeah.
This list would prevent that.
Yeah,
So do we want to eliminate B1?
Yes.
yeah.
Although, is that-
I don't understand what means.
That's not a utility. It's trash. The trash is not a utility.
That's
Yeah,
true.
the trash is not a utility.
Well, it depends on what you mean by utility. I
It's
mean,
not water, it's not electric.
but yeah, but it shows up on utility bills.
I bet you could take it to, take your trash bill to the BMV, they'll take it as a utility bill.
Yes.
So everyone felt good about getting rid of that clause.
I just saw utilities.
Can I ask, so the new B2, this no ordinance or resolution pertaining to issuance of debt, what does that mean? I'll be honest and say, I don't even know what that means.
No ordinance resolution, the issuance of.
Well, issuance of debt is, say, and then like the village, I don't know, about 20 years ago, issued some bonds to pay for dredging the lake.
Yeah.
That's issuing debt now. That's, to me, is clear, just because that's my world, is what comes after, what approves, grants, renews, or extends a franchise or other special privileges. I'm not sure what's meant by that.
I was gonna,
Take it out.
Yeah.
and then zoning, do we care if zoning is or is not passed as an emergency? As Pam has walked out of the room. Again, copy
I think
paste.
this was pulled from Groveport, is that
I
correct?
think so.
Yeah, Groveport's charter is much more restrictive on some of these procedural issues than other charters.
So should I eliminate B?
I think so.
Get rid of B. I hated B, all wrong.
It doesn't make a lot of, you could come up with all kinds of stuff.
It doesn't seem to.
I don't know that we're adding that.
Then in that case, this one goes to, the next one was directly related to B.
Well, maybe that would help. I answered.
Bam, 405 got real quick.
Aye.
All right. We have 2 people out of the room. Do we want to hold off? Yeah.
We have a forum, the experts trying to be like.
I'm trying to be polite. All right, moving on to 406 and then we'll come back. Effective date of legislation, was copy paste.
It's important, we'll still be on.
Sure. All resolutions shall be effective immediately unless otherwise specified. Ordinances shall take effect upon adoption.
I think A and C conflict, don't they?
Did we vote to agree on section 5 or?
I was gonna wait until
Thinking loud.
Ms. Summers walked back in the room. I was gonna jump back there real fast.
Oh, I'm sorry, resolution versus.
Yeah.
So I either didn't copy B correctly or something is weird. The following ordinance shall take effect upon adoption unless otherwise. Right? Yes, unless otherwise specified within the ordinance.
Yes.
So appropriate, so this stuff takes effect immediately,
Even though it's not an emergency.
even though it's not an emergency. How do we feel about that?
Appropriations, which is how it works today. Tax those expenses that's how it currently is, but I don't have an issue with that. Improvements petitioned for by owners of the requisite majority of the front.
Let me take that.
Yeah, I think 3 can go, because I don't know if else.
No, that's a reference to, a special assessment. That's what that
Is that something that we, I don't know what that is.
Can you say that? It makes sense to me now.
Yeah,
It's a special assessment.
I don't know that we
is.
should.
Well, that
take
ties into
that out.
statutory language that's in the special assessment statute. Yeah, I guess you could change that, but
So are you saying, suggesting?
I'm saying
we
it works as it is.
Okay.
Given the state of the law right now.
Any questions to the electorate or determination to proceed with an election? So that is.
That allows council to say, we want this to be on the ballot and we need to be able to do it right now.
Yeah, because they won't pass that until the day before the cutoff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Revision, codification, recodification, rearrangement, publication of ordinances. And then obviously the emergency ordinances. Anyone have a problem with B?
No.
C, all other ordinances are 30 days. Do we want some number other than 30?
27.
All right.
Why not 30? I've never understood 30.
Everybody back.
Yes,
That's the norm.
Yeah. Looking at the greatly reduced section 405 on my screen, because it's now very different from what's on your printouts if you printed it. I move that we approve the new draft language of section 405.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Section is passed. Section 406, I move to approve as drafted.
Second.
Any, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
I'm going with someone else.
No, it's mine.
All right, we are just tearing through this, you guys. This is great. Section 407, section 407, authentication. Each ordinance and resolution shall be authenticated. This is a copy paste. Signature of a presiding officer and the clerk. There was a couple different versions in the different charters. I went with this one. It seemed to kind of be the most reasonable. Failure or refusal to sign shall not invalidate an otherwise properly enacted ordinance or resolution. So, if the president's PO'd that it got passed, they can block it by refusing to sign.
To make sure we're clear, the mayor is not signing.
Correct.
It's also not, so currently, I believe it is the mayor, the fiscal officer, and our law director is who's currently signing.
Does anyone want it to be anyone other than or in addition to the presiding officer, which at any given meeting is either going to be the president or the vice president, and the clerk?
I just want to make sure we all knew what it is today.
Yeah. I move that we approve the draft language of section 407.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Section passes. Recording legislation, section 408. Again, copy paste. Each ordinance or resolution shall be recorded in a book or other record prescribed by council. Clerk of council or a duly authorized representative of the clerk shall, upon request of any person and upon payment of a fee, if established by council, certify true copies of any ordinance or resolution, which copies shall be admissible as evidence in any court.
That's cool.
Any problems with that? I move that we approve the draft language of section 408.
Second.
That Evan is the
Actually,
It's on now.
Yeah. because you're going back. All approved?
Aye. Yes, we all approve. Anyone opposed?
Anyone opposed?
Anyone abstain?
The section passes.
Which is
I'm
helping,
really
which is
awful.
helping our vice president out.
Right? All right, section 409, publication of ordinances and resolutions. Mostly copy paste. This is where I added a little bit of language in A2. So, shall be published by posting all of the following. 1, a full unabridged copy of each ordinance or resolution passed in not less than 3 public places.
Yeah.
Of each ordinance or resolution passed in not less than 3 public places in the municipal corporation for a period of 10 days in public places as determined by the council rules. That's a little awkwardly worded.
I also don't know that that is reasonable for our scenario. What you're saying there is the full legislation in 3 places, so it would be the full, whatever.
So the copy paste was the title.
Yeah.
And something that we talked about on Sunday was not liking just title. We wanted
But that was for notification beforehand. We wanted people to be able to see it beforehand so they could have knowledge of stuff before it happens.
So what if the public posting is title and then A2, which is where you're posting it electronically, is the full copy?
It would have to have it in a place where they could open it, if it's in a window thing, open it, and read through it, and, yeah.
So I like by title and then,
What is the statutory requirement currently for this? Is there one?
I don't know. I mean, it's just, I know Minerva Park's different because, it's smaller and I think there's a lot more pedestrian traffic here, but it seems like posting things publicly seems kind of antiquated nowadays. So with so many people are getting stuff online.
we'll check them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only way you get the information, you need to.
Maybe in 5, 10 years, when we have a charter review and people are used to looking online, maybe you can.
Is council currently allowed to post something to like Facebook page? Do they want
Well,
to?
so
It's not an official notification.
No, if they wanted to post it.
yeah, council has a First Amendment right to communicate however they would like.
So this is, I was looking for it earlier and I couldn't find it. I had come up with this the other night. So, all right, I also just made some changes. So if you look at the screen, a copy of the title of each ordinance or resolution in not less than 3 public places in the municipal corporation for a period, why don't we just say in the village? For a period of 10 days or as determined by council rules. And then 2 is a full unabridged copy of each ordinance or resolution electronically on the official village website, or if such website is unavailable, on a publicly accessible website.
Love it.
So if people like that language, I can copy that language up.
Yeah.
Up above.
Online or website.
Right.
Okay, I will do that after this meeting. All right, council may by ordinance or resolution require that ordinance and resolutions be published by other means in addition to the postings as required by this section. This was a copy paste that I didn't really care for too much. Would
You
we,
do it by council rules.
Yeah, may-
That would be a resolution.
by council rules, require that ordinances and resolutions be published by other means so the copy paste was kind of it was written to be instead of.
Right.
I didn't want that because I didn't want council rules to be able to get rid of that. So full disclosure, I changed it to in addition to.
Fine job.
For pointing out.
Yeah.
And, go ahead, Dave.
Just before I forget it, earlier we had items referencing 2 and 3, and if you don't correct that, it'll look like there's something missing. The numbering starts.
Yeah, one of the things that I've
I just
kind of noted down for myself is as we do this and continue to draft and revise, I'm gonna have to go through and make sure that everything is, all the references are internally consistent.
So I just wanted to point out in 409A1, it is at these number of places for a number of days or as determined by council rules. So council rules could change.
Yeah. And then just hit the old,
I saw that too, it wasn't a big deal, they couldn't do too much damage there.
Well, right, yeah, I
You need to know
as
that.
long as it's available online.
As long as it's available online. Yeah.
Do we want me to delete that or leave it as is?
You can change the whole rule. If they wanted to say we're not gonna do it.
They can.
Yeah, you need to delete that, I think.
Just do that.
You can go for it. When you're done.
We get the mayor part.
Oh
All
my God.
right. I would like to propose that as you see it on the screen, we approve the latest draft of section 409. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Passes. All right, 410 is amendment. This one, copy and paste entirely. I did not make any changes. Pending ordinance or resolution may be amended at any time prior to its passage by a majority vote of the members of council. An amendment of an ordinance shall not require additional readings unless amended during the final reading. Any ordinance or resolution or codified ordinance or resolution, what's that? May be amended by the passage of subsequent ordinances or resolutions that revise existing sections or parts thereof, enact new or supplemental parts, section or parts thereto, or repeal existing sections or parts thereof. This section does not prevent repeals by implication, which I wanted to ask Paul about. I don't know what repeal by implication means.
Yeah, I think that means is if you, the language clearly implies a certain meaning that it can repeal something else that's it's existing without you having to be specific.
Line item.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So,
that's how I understand it.
in this, oftentimes, when we needed to amend an ordinance or resolution, it couldn't be, the substance of that ordinance or resolution could be. You've had a first reading, you've had a second reading, and the third reading, you could make little amendments, but you can't change that. And this doesn't, I'm not seeing anything that's talking about the substance somehow.
Oh, yeah.
Right, I agree that maybe we need to work on that there, but also an amendment of an ordinance shall not require additional readings unless amended during the final reading. And in my experience, I found it quite common that the legislation would say, council is authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with somebody, for the amount of some number at a time, to begin work on some date, and it wouldn't be until the final reading that those lines would be filled, right? And the way that this reads,
They don't get to do that.
well, it
It
says
starts over.
that they have to have additional readings. And I don't know that, I don't find that as an unreasonable, because if you're, for example, the leaf pickup, right? They pass legislation, but, they know that they want that legislation to pass on a certain day, and again, they might not have the vendor selected until that third reading.
Usually they almost say an amount not to exceed so many.
Yeah.
I would just recommend if you're gonna keep AI, that you specify, I think you're implying that you would have one additional reading, right?
Well, it doesn't even say, it just says.
Well, we could just, can
But I think you
solve
should
the
be
problem by
specific,
deleting it?
yeah.
By deleting A1.
I think this is a good place to bring up Pam's point of substance, right? An amendment of an ordinance shall not be required unless that amendment is substantial.
Or material,
Unless materially amended.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that,
and then get rid of during. And I think that satisfies.
so that.
Now, it also doesn't, we're not instructing how many additional readings if.
But wait, now, if since you got rid of the final reading, I mean, I think you need to be, if they're making a material amendment in the second reading, is that okay? Because it's still gonna have one additional reading.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you wanna keep the final reading, right?
Well, and you don't want to wait to finally.
Right, so I think we gotta actually,
Put it back, controls it.
But then I think you need to say, I think you're implying that it would be, if you do it during the final reading, that you would have one additional reading, but I think you need to say that.
Say that, yeah.
in which case, one additional reading will be required.
Beautiful.
All right, anyone have a problem with the rest of it? I move that we approve the newly revised section 410. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Passed. All right, zoning measures, this is all for Pam. I copied and pasted with wild abandon when we talked about it on Sunday. We literally said, we are not touching this without Pam here. We don't know what's going on with it. I picked the charter and copy and pasted.
Which chart?
I don't remember.
With.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
We want to.
Probably Dublin, but
I was like,
So we want to.
That might be the worst one.
did you say
That
that?
might work.
It could be.
Okay.
Not official, I'm right.
Yeah, well, we want to.
Kick the can? Yeah, because it's E22.
I would agree that we should really.
That,
Our input.
yeah, that's gonna be a fight, yeah,
So that's right.
we're gonna have to.
Adoption of technical codes is wholesale copy paste. I did not change anything.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Other than, I think I did update sections 407 and 408 that are referenced here. I did make sure those got changed and should be accurate.
I don't see how we would be able to do anything with wiring and plumbing. How would you?
I think this was Groveport and
It's still in
And so we-
Ohio, yeah.
Okay, I think Eric's got
Yeah,
some good insight
so
on
we,
this one.
some of these you might want to have with zoning, have a bit of a long, I'll point out that, for example, we don't have our own departments for these things, so you can leave them there because what the village or municipality does is they contract out. If you don't have your own building department, that's okay, because it gets contracted out. In this case, Franklin County does it. Commercial stuff, Linden Township does it. In plumbing, we do plumbing, we do plumbing permits, but we process, and it goes down to Franklin County, and the Department of Health that handles plumbing permits, inspections. So anything where you're dealing with departments we don't have, that's okay, it's contract.
I do think that this is I think we should take this language and maybe ask if Eric would review it. And I think this is his wheelhouse.
Yes.
fine.
And then,
Yeah, we definitely
You know,
need
get
an
a-
expert to just.
Yeah, I would say the technical codes thing is pretty boilerplate.
It was,
Charter I've seen has something like this. It may vary a little bit, but it's basically, like you said, I think Eric would be a good person.
we're weighing in just to make sure that we're not screwing up his business or anybody else's. Sure.
It's all about the money that comes in too, by the way.
All right, I'm putting it in red. We're at minimum tabling it for tonight.
Yeah.
And then finally, section 413, codification. This is pretty boilerplate, but I did make an exception with A1. So council shall provide for the preparation of a general codification, recodification, revision, or rearrangement of all village ordinances, which shall be adopted by council by ordinance and shall be published in printed form together with this charter. Here's what I added. This is something we talked about on Sunday. Codification of village ordinances shall include the full text of such ordinances, including all attachments and exhibits. That way, when someone pulls up the codification, they don't get a law that has no meaning because there's no, all of the meanings in the exhibits or whatever. And then current service supplementing the village's codified ordinances shall be maintained in the manner prescribed by council.
Yeah, that one, I'm not sure what
What it means?
Yeah, what that.
I don't really know what it means either, but I got.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say that there are plenty of there are websites out there that post municipal codes and stuff like that. I think that's what they're aiming for, but I don't like the way it's written.
Well, okay, and we do this, we hire the company to do this. And we need to continue to have someone else do this because we have failed miserably at doing
Well,
this.
and it's also very, very, like Paul just said, it's very common for jurisdictions of any size to pay for a service to host codified ordinances.
Which I'm saying that we only got this done a year and a half ago.
And it has to be in here, we have to force it.
Yeah.
And it took 3 years.
Yes, I can tell
Send
you,
me some better suggestions
I can-
for that, and I'll throw it in there.
I can tell you when I started, it wasn't the codification they were just talking about. I had to go through multiple books to try to get the right year and code. It was very painful. So it's much better to have it online.
Yeah, we're going online, yeah, so.
Yeah, I'm not quarreling with the intent, I'm just saying, I think the language.
Way true.
Yeah.
The language almost says that like we couldn't change that, right? A current service.
Well, it's just, I mean,
I don't know what it means.
I don't know what it
At the
means.
end of the day, I'm not clear on
Right,
what that
what's
language is.
supplementing, you know, it's written strange.
Yeah, I agree.
So what I'm gonna do is, I've notated in my own weird way that we like the rest of 413, but we're not gonna vote on it because we wanna get some better language for B.
Yeah.
Alright, it is 8:27, we're not gonna get to go talk about, some of this other stuff that Paul and I emailed back and forth about, so I think we're gonna have to hit that at one of the next meetings.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it goes or if it goes in the charter, but one of the things that I've noticed that the current council talks about and that I want to go read maybe, is that we don't have any written procedures, like we don't have any administrative rules. Like this is how this department works and this is how this department works. But where does that go? I think I've seen it in charters, that there shall be administrative rules.
I've seen administrative rules, OBEX, Johnstown, their website, right after the charter, they have their administrative rules.
And they don't
Which
write
are
it here, they just, there will be administrative rules.
I mean, they're,
Isn't that gonna be a creature of legislation, like there were, council would pass
Yeah, it
legislation?
would, well, I think you're recognizing that, you're saying, should the charter mandate the council creates certain.
Yes, because there literally is no place where things are written down, so if somebody leaves.
There's administrative departments is coming up in
Yeah.
Article 7,
I
so,
think we can maybe deal with that then.
yeah, that would be.
Does anyone have any old business or anything else to bring up?
Several of us attended a council meeting, and to me, it was a very discouraging event. And I would encourage any of you that have the time to attend a council meeting so that you can get a better flavor of what is going on or what is not going on.
But this is a new council, these are people relatively new, so.
But just how bad it really is.
They're learning.
So, hold on, I did have something I wanted to say, but it just go away.
Are we meeting?
So that was what I was gonna bring up
On
next. I believe we are
Yes.
planning to meet this Sunday, and
And it will
it's,
be posted.
it will be posted, right?
Yes.
So,
I confirm.
Yes,
I
here
confirm.
is Sunday 9 a.m.
Yes,
Yeah.
right,
Sent an email. Yes.
The purpose for Sunday's meetings is a big one. We're gonna be going through the memos for mayor and administrator.
Right.
So those are where I get my instructions on what to draft. So those are probably the two most important remaining articles in the entire rest of the charter.
On St. Patty's Day.
Still Sunday morning.
Yes. What was that, Eric?
Happy St. Patty's Day.
Good.
Is that what will be?
I can't think of anything else. If no one else has anything, I'm gonna move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Meeting adjourned. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
I muddled through.
Yeah.
Oh,